I knew I wasn't alone the exact second my CB radio sputtered out and a wet, rhythmic tapping began echoing from the inside of my sleeper berth's roof. Even though I was hauling a locked, empty reefer at 70 miles per hour through the pitch-black Nebraska plains. My name is Garrett Vane, and I've been driving long-haul routes for over 9 years, meaning I'm no stranger to the tricks the mind plays on you during those endless, exhausting midnight shifts. But what happened to me on Route 9 South was absolutely no trick of the light or lack of sleep. It was a freezing Tuesday night, somewhere around 2:45 a.m., and the highway was completely dead, totally devoid of any headlights or taillights for miles in either direction, leaving nothing but the mesmerizing, rhythmic hum of my diesel engine and the vast, oppressive emptiness of the cornfield stretching out infinitely into the dark. The tapping started out incredibly faint, almost like light rain hitting the fiberglass cab. But within minutes, it evolved into a deliberate, heavy thudding that seemed to move with alarming purpose from the furthest back wall of the sleeper berth right up toward the heavy cloth curtain separating my driver's seat from the resting area. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white, adjusting my rearview mirrors frantically in the dim light, expecting to see the back door of the cab swung open to the night air. But everything was sealed perfectly tight, and yet the temperature inside the truck suddenly plummeted so fast that my breath began to mist heavily in the faint, eerie glow of the dashboard lights. Desperate for any form of human connection to break this suffocating, terrifying silence, I reached for the CB radio mic with a trembling hand, clicking the button repeatedly to ask if anyone else was on the channel. But all that came back through the static-heavy speaker was a horrific, distorted noise that slowly morphed into the sound of someone heavily breathing right into a microphone, followed by a low, mocking chuckle that sounded exactly like my own voice. My heart hammered violently against my ribs as I forced myself to look out the driver's side window. And that was when the true, unadulterated nightmare began. Because out there in the absolute darkness of the passing cornfields, a massive, elongated shadow figure was keeping perfect pace with my semi-truck, its limbs moving in an unnatural, disjointed blur as it glided effortlessly across the rough, uneven terrain without ever falling a single inch behind my vehicle. I slammed my foot all the way down on the accelerator, forcing the massive, heavy rig to its absolute mechanical limit as the speedometer climbed past 80. Then 85, the engine roaring in loud protest while the rhythmic thudding inside the cab grew significantly faster and more aggressive, moving directly above my head until the metal roof began to visibly flex downward under an immense, crushing external weight. The shadow outside suddenly lunged closer, transitioning from the edge of the fields directly onto the black asphalt of the highway, its featureless, pitch-black silhouette now running effortlessly right alongside my driver's side door, its head turned 90 degrees to stare directly through the glass window pane with two faint, glowing white pinpricks for eyes that radiated pure, unadulterated malice. In a complete and total panic, I grabbed a heavy metal flashlight from the center console and slammed it hard against the window glass to try and scare the entity away, but the exact millisecond I made contact, every single light on my dashboard went completely dead. The headlights cut out entirely, and the roaring diesel engine instantly died, plunging me into a terrifying, silent coast through the blinding, pitch-black darkness of the Nebraska night. The truck began slowing down rapidly, its heavy tires crunching loudly against the loose gravel shoulder as my forward momentum failed. And as the massive rig came to a final, agonizing halt in the absolute middle of nowhere, the heavy thudding on the roof abruptly stopped, replaced by the slow, deliberate sound of the driver's side door handle clicking and beginning to slowly turn from the outside. I scrambled backward in pure terror into the passenger seat, gripping the heavy flashlight like a weapon as the heavy door slowly creaked open to reveal nothing but the cold night air and an empty highway. But as I let out a trembling, ragged breath, a freezing cold hand wrapped tightly around my ankle from beneath the sleeper berth curtain, dragging me backward into the pitch black as a voice whispered my own name into the dead silence of the cab. I kicked wildly, feeling my boot connect with something that felt solid yet entirely freezing, like solid block ice, and the sudden release allowed me to throw myself out of the open passenger door, falling hard onto the gravel road below. I didn't even look back at the truck as I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly down the center of the dark highway, my lungs burning in the freezing air while the faint sound of that familiar, mocking chuckle echoed from the cab behind me, floating through the darkness until a passing motorist finally found me miles away, shivering and completely incoherent. When the state police eventually recovered my truck the next morning, they found it parked perfectly on the shoulder with the keys still in the ignition and the engine running smoothly. But the interior of the sleeper berth was completely ruined, covered from top to bottom in thick, black frost that didn't melt for days, and the deep, indented shape of a massive handprint was permanently melted right into the fiberglass ceiling directly above the driver's seat. Stranded in the absolute dead zone of the desert, I stepped out of the cab with a heavy metal tire iron in one hand and a high-powered spotlight in the other, the suffocating heat of the Arizona night pressing down on me like a physical weight as I walked toward the back of the trailer to check the airlines. As I knelt down beneath the massive frame of the trailer, the ambient nocturnal sounds of the desert, the crickets, the dry wind, the distant coyotes, suddenly went completely silent, replaced by a strange, wet, scraping sound originating from the very top of my cargo container, as if something incredibly heavy and clumsy was crawling along the corrugated metal roof. I froze beneath the chassis, holding my breath as the loud scraping moved slowly toward the front of the truck, followed by the distinct, sickening sound of the driver's side door being forcibly pried open with a sharp screech of tearing metal. Fear paralyzed my muscles, but I knew I couldn't stay hidden underneath the trailer forever. So I carefully crawled out from beneath the massive tires and pointed my spotlight up toward the open cab door, only to see the interior completely empty, though the air inside was now thick with the overpowering metallic stench of old blood and decay. Suddenly, the truck's CB radio clicked on by itself, emitting a high-pitched, agonizing screech before a voice began to speak through the heavy static. But it wasn't a stranger's voice. It was the exact voice of my mother, who had passed away over 10 years ago, begging me in a weeping, frantic tone to come back inside the truck because it was freezing out in the dark. Tears stung my eyes as the psychological horror of the trick overwhelmed me. But the illusion was shattered when I looked up at the truck's roof and saw a pale, emaciated creature with impossibly long, multi-jointed limbs crawling upside down along the top of the cab, its face a horrifying mimicry of a human woman. Stranded in the absolute dead zone of the desert, I stepped out of the cab with a heavy metal tire iron in one hand and a high-powered spotlight in the other, the suffocating heat of the Arizona night pressing down on me like a physical weight as I walked toward the back of the trailer to check the airlines. As I knelt down beneath the massive frame of the trailer, the ambient nocturnal sounds of the desert, the crickets, the dry wind, the distant coyotes, suddenly went completely silent, replaced by a strange, wet, scraping sound originating from the very top of my cargo container, as if something incredibly heavy and clumsy was crawling along the corrugated metal roof. I froze beneath the chassis, holding my breath as the loud scraping moved slowly toward the front of the truck, followed by the distinct, sickening sound of the driver's side door being forcibly pried open with a sharp screech of tearing metal. Fear paralyzed my muscles, but I knew I couldn't stay hidden underneath the trailer forever. So I carefully crawled out from beneath the massive tires and pointed my spotlight up toward the open cab door, only to see the interior completely empty, though the air inside was now thick with the overpowering metallic stench of old blood and decay. Suddenly, the truck's CB radio clicked on by itself, emitting a high-pitched, agonizing screech before a voice began to speak through the heavy static. But it wasn't a stranger's voice. It was the exact voice of my mother, who had passed away over 10 years ago, begging me in a weeping, frantic tone to come back inside the truck because it was freezing out in the dark. Tears stung my eyes as the psychological horror of the trick overwhelmed me. But the illusion was shattered when I looked up at the truck's roof and saw a pale, emaciated creature with impossibly long, multi-jointed limbs crawling upside down along the top of the cab, its face a horrifying mimicry of a human woman, its jaw unhinging to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth as it prepared to leap down directly onto me. I didn't think twice. I dropped the heavy spotlight and ran blindly into the open desert, sprinting through the cacti and sharp rocks in the pitch black while the heavy, rapid thudding of four-legged footsteps pursued me closely through the sand, the creature making a wet clicking sound with every stride it took. I could hear its breath right behind my neck, smelling that awful scent of decay, and just when I thought my legs would give out, I spotted the distant bright lights of a state way station on the horizon. I threw myself through the glass doors of the building, screaming for help as the two officers inside jumped up in total shock. But when they looked out the window with their weapons drawn, there was nothing in the darkness except for the vast, empty desert sand. The police accompaniment back to my truck revealed a scene that defied all logic. The vehicle was exactly where I left it, but the entire driver's side of the cab was completely crushed inward, covered in deep, jagged claw marks that had sliced right through the heavy reinforced steel, and the CB radio was melted into a solid lump of plastic, still faintly emitting the sound of a woman crying. There is no terror quite like watching your own semi-truck dashboard clock count backward while the pitch-black woods of upstate New York completely swallow the road ahead, leaving you trapped in a miles-long spatial loop where the exact same rotting deer carcass appears on the asphalt every 3 minutes. My name is Wyatt Sterling, and this unexplainable paranormal nightmare occurred on a treacherous, fog-laden stretch of Route 11 during a late-night haul where the line between reality and the supernatural completely dissolved. It was just past midnight, and the dense, heavy fog had reduced my visibility to mere feet, forcing me to crawl along the winding two-lane blacktop at a cautious 30 miles per hour, while the towering pine trees on either side of the road seemed to lean inward, creating a claustrophobic tunnel of absolute darkness. I first noticed something was deeply wrong when I passed a distinctive, mangled deer carcass on the right shoulder, only to pass the exact same carcass in the exact same position just 3 minutes later, a mathematical impossibility that made my stomach drop as I realized the odometer on my dashboard had completely frozen. I pulled out my smartphone to check the GPS, but the screen was just a chaotic web of static and glitched pixels. And when I looked back up at the road, the digital clock on my instrument panel began rapidly ticking backward, jumping from 12:15 a.m. to 12:02 a.m. in a matter of seconds while the headlights began to flicker and dim. Panic mounting, I decided to pull the truck over and attempt to turn around. But the moment I stopped the rig, the dense fog outside illuminated with a faint, sickening green luminescence and a massive, shadowy humanoid figure, standing easily 9 feet tall with impossibly wide shoulders and no visible head, stepped out from the tree line and stood perfectly still in the middle of the road directly ahead of me. The sheer presence of the entity radiated a wave of intense dread that made my skin crawl and my ears ring with a deafening, high-pitched frequency, and before I could even engage the reverse gear, the creature began to advance toward the truck, not by walking, but by teleporting forward in glitchy, terrifying increments every time my headlights flickered. With every single blink of the lights, the headless entity closed the distance, moving from 50 feet away to 20, then suddenly appearing right over the hood of my truck, its massive, shadow-like hands pressing flat against the windshield, causing the heavy glass to instantly spiderweb with hundreds of deep cracks under the immense pressure. The ambient temperature inside the cab dropped so low that ice began to rapidly form on the inside of the steering wheel, and the radio burst to life at maximum volume, screaming a chaotic chorus of distorted human agonizing wails and mechanical screeching that threatened to burst my eardrums. In a desperate bid for survival, I slammed the truck into drive and floored the gas pedal, choosing to ram directly through the supernatural anomaly rather than sit there and be crushed alive in the cab. And as the heavy steel bumper made contact with the shadow, a blinding flash of white light consumed my vision, followed by a violent jolt that knocked me completely unconscious against the steering wheel. When I finally awoke, the bright morning sun was shining through my shattered windshield, and my truck was parked safely at a rest stop over 60 miles away from Route 11, But the terrifying proof of my encounter remained etched into the metal of my hood. Two massive, burned handprints melted directly into the steel, a permanent reminder of the night I barely escaped the loop. I sat there in the warm sunlight for a long time, trying to convince myself that it was just an incredibly vivid nightmare, until I noticed something caught in the wiper blades, a thick, black, fibrous substance that resembled burnt skin, which began to dissolve into ash the moment the wind caught it. The trucking company forced me to pay for the windshield out of my own pocket because they didn't believe a word of my story, but I didn't care about the money. I turned in my keys that very afternoon and never looked back. Even now, years later, whenever I drive through a thick patch of fog in my personal car, my heart rate spikes, and I find myself checking the clock, terrified that the numbers will start counting backward again and trap me in that endless, headless nightmare on Route 11. It took me 3 hours to realize that the hitchhiker I had politely waved past at a gas station in rural Montana wasn't running along the shoulder to catch up to me. He was effortlessly keeping pace with my truck at 80 miles per hour, his bare feet silently slapping the asphalt right outside my driver's side window while he stared at me with hollow, pitch-black eyes. My name is Vance Callahan, and that night on Interstate 90 entirely dismantled my skepticism regarding the supernatural, leaving me with a permanent dread of the open road and the things that lurk in the dark spaces between cities. I had stopped at a crumbling, poorly lit truck stop around 1 a.m. to grab a coffee and stretch my legs, noticing a strange man standing near the edge of the property wearing a tattered, outdated denim jacket, his face completely obscured by a low-hanging baseball cap as he held a handwritten sign that simply read home. I didn't think much of it and climbed back into my rig, pulling out onto the empty, desolate expanse of Interstate 90 where the Montana wilderness stretches out like an infinite sea of blackness beneath a starless sky. About an hour into the drive, a strange, persistent tapping sound began on my driver's side window, and when I glanced over, my heart nearly stopped as I saw the same man from the gas station gliding effortlessly along the asphalt. His body perfectly level as if he were on ice skates, his head turned sharply toward me with an expressionless, pale face that looked like molded wax. The sheer impossibility of a human being running at highway speeds caused a wave of cold terror to wash over me, and I instantly slammed my foot onto the accelerator, watching the digital speedometer climb from 70 to 85, yet the entity remained completely stationary relative to my window. Its dark, empty eye sockets locked onto mine with a gaze that felt like it was drilling directly into my soul. I tried to look away, focusing entirely on the road ahead, but the creature began to violently slam its pale hands against the thick glass, the sound echoing through the cab like gunshots while it began to mimic the sound of a crying infant, its voice projecting directly inside my head with terrifying clarity. Suddenly, the truck's engine began to sputter and cough, the RPMs dropping drastically as if the vehicle itself was succumbing to the malevolent energy radiating from the creature, and despite my frantic pumping of the gas pedal, the massive semi-truck began to rapidly lose speed, coasting down to 40, 30, and then finally coming to a dead stop on the pitch-black shoulder of the highway. The moment the truck stopped, the entity vanished from the window, leaving behind a thick, oily residue on the glass, and the absolute silence of the Montana night rushed in, heavy and suffocating as all the electrical systems in my truck completely died, leaving me in total darkness. I sat frozen in the captain's chair, holding my breath as I heard the slow, heavy sound of footsteps walking along the metal steps of the cab, followed by a violent tearing sound as the heavy steel padlock on my trailer doors was snapped like a twig. A few seconds later, the entire truck rocked violently as something incredibly heavy climbed into the back of my trailer, and through the thin walls separating my cab from the cargo area, I could hear the distinct, wet sound of something dragging itself across the floorboards, followed by a low, raspy whisper coming from directly behind my head seat, saying that it was finally home and thanking me for the ride. I didn't wait around for whatever was in the back to find a way into the cab. I burst through the passenger door, tumbling out onto the dark highway and running for my absolute life without looking back once. I ran until my legs gave out, finally flagging down a highway patrol car nearly 3 miles down the road, my face pale and my voice completely gone from screaming. When the officers arrived at the truck with their guns drawn, they found the trailer doors swung wide open, but the cargo was completely untouched. The only thing inside was a pile of old, tattered denim, clothing covered in a century's worth of thick dust, resting right in the center of the floor where the dragging sound had stopped.